Welcome to the presentation, Writing Strategies Review.
This is another one of those presentations that's going to bring in some writing strategies and other ideas that will be review for some of our students. But again, I often find that these are the things that students really struggle with when they turn in their papers. So I've gone back and included these as part of the repertoire and part of our semester focus, because I ended up having to cover these things anyway with a lot of students, and it's easier to just do it from the beginning. So again, take a look through here, see what applies to you, and hopefully this will help you. As you work on longer papers and more sophisticated papers throughout your college career, you don't want to lose behind this idea of argument. Sometimes when we cover this back in writing one, it's really easy to sort of isolate this and say, okay, arguments, one style of paper, I can do this, you write your argument paper and you're good to go. But really that strategy you're going to use in a lot of papers. And even though some papers are not going to be as forceful and as direct and as biased or opinionated as maybe some of your argument papers were previously, you're still going to use a strategy. And many papers, your instructors and professors are going to want you to have your own ideas and points of view, built on other research, of course, and building on others' research. But you're still going to want to use these argument strategies. So take a few minutes to look back over these. I've specifically pinpointed the rational, ethical, and emotional appeals because you still want to use these in your paper. And you want to think about how these apply to whatever you're writing about, whether it's here in Writing 2 or, again, other more advanced classes that you're getting into now. Because, again, the idea of logic or logos, using facts, examples, authoritative evidence, that's going to get to be more and more important, and you're going to learn more strategies, and you're going to start figuring out within the field that you're getting into, especially you're going to get a better sense of who is credible and who's well respected and who isn't. You're going to get more experience and be able to do that. So you're going to keep using this skill and improving in this. Same with ethos. As you gain more skill as a writer, you're going to be able to better shape your voice and your tone and help readers better connect with you and see you as more credible. But another thing that's going to happen is you're going to gain some confidence, and hopefully that has started happening for you already. But again, you want to come across as confident, not arrogant, not cocky, and you want to come across as humble as well, because again, you're still very, very early in your academic career, but you've done good research, and you should think of yourself as someone who is thoughtful, objective, and trying to do the right thing with your paper. So keep that in mind. And then lastly, again, emotional appeal. This is one that you don't want to overuse. You don't want to try to manipulate your readers too much with this. And some readers will be turned off if you use too much of this. But again, you're going to use some of these techniques to connect with your readers, to help humanize some of your topics, and to better connect with the ideas with your readers on sort of a gut level that may bypass the head sometimes. So all of these appeals altogether will work really well for you, and don't neglect them as you move through Writing 2 and other classes. A couple other appeal related strategies to keep in mind is you want to establish common ground with your readers. Again, especially as you are asking your readers to work with you through a longer paper, you do want to sort of build that rapport with them as you go along, and you don't need to be their buddies, but as we talked about ethos, they do need to trust you, and you want to show that you have certain beliefs and certain ideas and certain values in common. You also want to avoid logical fallacies, and again, I've got some page numbers from our book listed there. That's something that if you need to go back and review, you can. And of course, you may want to point some of these out in some of the other sources that you come across. You might find some logical fallacies that you want to point out to your readers and use to support your own argument by sort of defeating those. So again, keep these in mind, use them, sprinkle them throughout your paper, and it'll really make it a lot better. As you work through a longer paper and you sort of learn how to pace yourself and write that style, one of the easiest things that for students to do that kind of waylays and downgrades the paper a little bit is to sort of get distracted and start wandering off and sort of writing about other directions. You want to stay connected to your thesis, and one good way of doing this is after you've written a section of paper, we all have different ways we go about this. In our writing, some people just like to write and blast away and get as much as they can and then go back and work with it. Other folks like to, work on it in smaller pieces. Whatever way works for you. After you've written a chunk, I recommend you go back and you maybe sketch out on a side piece of paper, or at least go through in your mind and ask yourself, how does this connect to my thesis? How does this support the main point I want to make? And then use that as an opportunity to go back and maybe add some language, add some explanation on how it actually does relate to your thesis. Do you need to do this every single paragraph? Not necessarily, because sometimes several paragraphs will form a section and you're going to take some time to develop ideas. But you do want to do this every once in a while and make sure that every section of your paper at least shows some relationship with the thesis and shows how you're developing those ideas for the reader. You also want to use some key terms. That helps a lot. And maybe you've defined some key terms earlier in your paper. Maybe there's some key terms that you're working with and sort of building on. So you want to make sure you're using those consistently. You also want to guide your readers. And there are a bunch of chapters that relate to that. I'm not going to go all the way through all those. But I want you to know where they're located, so see that on the slide, so that as these ideas come up, I may reference them and say, hey, you may want to go back and look at this chapter. You may want to work on this aspect. At least you know where those are, and I'm always happy to help give you more direct input and help and feedback with those topics.
Here I'm including a sample paragraph structure that some students find very helpful. I know some students really dislike the idea of formulas and templates and structures. They feel sort of constrained by that, and I can understand that. But the sample paragraph structure has helped quite a few students who might be struggling with organization, or might really just need some sort of a framework to help them know where to put their information just to get started. The idea with this is a lot like with music or other art, that oftentimes if you can start off using this formula and template just as a way of knowing how to form your words and form your ideas, then the more practice and experience you get, you eventually figure out ways of working and organizing that make more sense for what you're writing, and it works a lot better. But I really encourage students to use this, especially if they're having a hard time with organization or just want to be able to put their words down without thinking about what order they are for an hour and a half before forming a paragraph. This is a structure that's been encouraged in not just Ancilla where I teach, but also in universities where I've taught writing. Often they'll pass something like this out to students just to give them a good way to get started. So let's look at this for a minute. First, you'd want to have your transition and topic sentence. Often you can do that all in one sentence, occasionally two, but often you can use a transition toward the beginning of your topic sentence and use that to set the plate for what's coming in that paragraph. Then you're going to start explaining a major point that you're going to make in the paragraph. So you've used the topic sentence to start introducing that point and to give your paragraph some focus, and then you start explaining that major point. As you explain that major point, then, number 3, you're going to bring in your scholarly expert support and analysis of that paragraph's topic. This is where if there's a theory you're working with or some great big idea that you want to bring in from another source, this is a good place to put that. Then, once you've gotten the idea in there and your scholarly thoughts, you can start bringing in statistics, other raw information. Number 4 there you can see you're going to work that in as you sort of develop those ideas that you're working with now. And then number 5, that might be where a personal experience, story elements are going to come in. You really want to avoid shaping your whole paragraph around someone's story, whether it's yours or someone else's, because that can be really hard to follow for readers, and it's hard for readers sometimes to see the point that you're trying to make with that story. So when you bring those in toward the middle of the paragraph, toward the end of the paragraph, so that as you bring in that personal story, you can be working with those more intellectual academic ideas and show how those ideas apply to whatever personal story you're bringing in. It's nice to put a human face and a human element into your writing, but again, your paragraph needs to be formed around and shaped around ideas rather than just stories. Number 6, toward the end of the paragraph, you don't just want to end with your story or end with a quote. You want to conclude your paragraph as you see fit, making sure that whether you include personal story elements or not, the story should have a clear vision of your paragraph's main point and how it relates to your thesis by the end of the paragraph. So as you wrap up your paragraph, make sure that you're relating it back to the thesis and you're reiterating whatever point you're trying to make. Your point may have developed and expanded throughout the paragraph, and this is a good place to show your reader how that's happened.
One last reminder here. Some students in writing 2 still really struggle with using you in your papers. And this has gotten to be more common, both in our spoken language that we use, just conversing with each other, but also in writing. It's gotten more common, and it's not something I'll always jump all over you in your paper about, but something you really want to watch if you're using you very much. Because often it's not so much a case of just being kind of slang and casual. That's one thing, but the bigger problem here is that you're not really being precise, and you want to use direct, clear language for your readers. And often when you're using you, it's kind of lazy. So theoretically, you should only be used when writing directly to readers and giving directions, because that is who the you is in your paper. If you're referring to a specific group of people, like scientists or researchers or professors or low-income folks, or whatever you're getting into, make sure that you're more specific about who that is. So you want to use people or a more specific noun instead. And you also want to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of using they with a singular noun. Again, that's getting more and more commonly accepted. I'm not going to jump all over you with that, but again, you do want to make sure that you're practicing, when you can, more of an academic style. So things to keep in mind. Again, if I see this becoming prevalent in your writing, I'll ask you to work on it a bit. But try to avoid it as you can throughout your revising and editing process.